Okay, so welcome everybody. It's so nice to be learning together. Today we're going to be learning together the sixth chapter of Sefer Yehoshua. This is the topic of Jericho. Before we start, we have a sponsor for today, and we want to thank Paula and Moshe Weinstein, who are celebrating the birth of a great grandson to Uri and to Sandra Weinstein. And a son to Sammy and Sylvie Baum. Be'ezrat Hashem. Wow, that's a big deal. He should grow up to give you a lot of nachas and to do a lot of good in this world for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Be'ezrat Hashem. Thank you for making the sponsorship, this opportunity to learn for this special moment, special occasion. We're going to spend a little bit of time today learning about one of the most iconic aspects of Sefer Yehoshua, folks. This is how it works. This is where it all happens. Is when you think about Sefer Yehoshua, you think about this moment, the moment of Jericho. But let's take a little bit of a review, and then let's jump into some questions, because I'll let you on a little secret. I thought I knew this chapter, I thought I knew this perek, but in preparing it again this time, there's a whole lot more than meets the eye, and I'm very excited to share with you some of the journey that I went through in trying to re-prepare this chapter. So we have the beginning, the chapter, just a few salient verses to put us into perspective. We're told at the beginning of the perek that Jericho is sogeres umisugeres mipnei bnei Israel. Jericho is closed and closed, double language. It's doubly closed in front of the nation of Israel. And Yosef and Bar. Nobody can go in, nobody can go out. It is a walled city. Then Hashem says to Yehoshua, if you look at Pasuk Gimel, you're going to take the ark, v'saboisem esa'ir, you're going to circle the city. Kol anshe milchama hekif esa'ir pamachas, koi tasu sheshes yomim. For 6 days, you're going to encircle the city of Jericho. V'shiva kohanim yisu shiva shafaros hayavlim lifnei Aaron, v'yom hashvi'i tosu esa'ir sheva pamim. So there's going to be 7 priests carrying 7 horns that are going to accompany it as they do 7 days of circling it. On the 7th day, on the 7th day when they do the 7th lap, then they're going to blow the horn. Then everybody's going to scream out and call. Trua gedola, a great calling. Remember the word trua we use as the shofar, but it's actually resembling the crying of a human being, right? In that case, the wall will fall and you're able to enter the city. So that's what we're told. Yehoshua repeats the instructions, but he does so slightly differently. He has a few details. He talks about the chalutz. If you see in Pasuk V'zayin, the chalutz goes in front of everybody. Who is the chalutz? Just curious. So the chalutz refers to, today we use the language in Hebrew as the chalutzim. They are referring to, usually today that's the pioneers, right? Who are referring to? Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, right? So if we look back into the crossing of the Jordan, the chalutz refers to the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain who go first. Now we have to see their reliance on those 2 tribes more than other tribes. We'll have to come back to that when we say goodbye to them in Perek Chav Beis. There's a lot of problems that are going to be created because they're over-reliance on them. But nonetheless, the 2 tribes go first, then the Aaron, then the rest of the army. We'll see the order in a moment. And so it goes. We hear about the implementation from Pasuk Yud Aleph onwards, where they do the first lap and then they wake up early and they do the last lap. And Yehoshua gives instructions. But what's curious is that he gives a little more instructions that were not warranted, that were not given by Hashem. If you look at Pasuk Yud Zayin in our section called the destruction, he says, "Vayisah ha'ir cherem." He says the city will be destroyed. Cherem means it's going to be destroyed or designated. La Hashem to God. Rak rachav hazana tichya v'hi v'kol asher atzav abayis ki hachbayisa es hanachim asher shlachanu. She hid the messengers. She and her family are going to be saved. Take them out. Rak atem shimru min acherem pentachrimu v'levakachtem min acherem v'samtem es machnei Yisrael acherem v'achartem osai. If you take from the spoils, you will block up or you will create problems to the nation of Israel, and take all the silver and gold, and he says, and designate it to the Oitzar Hashem, which is the royal coffers. So that's the way he does this. He adds on this which Hashem never commanded him to. By the way, why would Hashem not mention the Rachav part? Why would Hashem not say save Rachav? Because Hashem never told them to save her in the first place. It was a human request, which a human said yes. And so, therefore, he's saying to the humans, you need to honor that request. But God didn't get involved in that one at all. But the piece over here about the Cherem, we have to figure out what's really going on here, why he did this. And so it is. They enter they go around the seventh time, they blow the shofar, they call, the walls fall down, they enter the city, there's a war which ensues, they kill every human being, they take they destroy everything, and they burn it to the ground. And finally, if you think this is not enough, then Yehoshua takes it one step further. This part is lesser known. If you look at the very end of the perek in Pasuk Chavav, the last section, it says, Vayishaba Yehoshua ba'oseh hilem. He makes an oath, Arura ish lifnei Hashem asher yakum uvano esa'ir. Cursed be the person who rebuilds the city of Jericho. Bivachara yasadenu. When he puts the foundations down, he will lose his firstborn. Uvitzira yatziv d'laseh. And when he finishes the city, he will lose his youngest child. So there's a curse upon rebuilding Jericho. And finally, Hashem es Yehoshua, vayishamar kol b'chol haaretz. And Yeshua's name goes about the whole land. We'll have to ask, what, did Hashem command this? Did Hashem not command this? This is our perek. That's just basic summary of some of the salient psukim. So let's just get this clear as to where we are. I think it's good to know. So I use this map downstairs. Actually, we have it in our basement to show the kids whenever we go to Israel where we're going. But it's good to know. So here we go. We're above the Dead Sea. Here, this is where the nation of Israel were. Okay, so the nation of Israel on the top of the Dead Sea on the right, that is in Moab. I'm sorry for those who are sitting in the front. Right here. So they cross the Jordan. That's what we talked about in the previous program. Okay, so they cross the Jordan here, and right over here is the city of Jericho. Okay, so right over here is the city of Jericho. We see it because whenever you come down from Jerusalem, we take Route 1. This is Route 1 over here. Okay, so there's Route 1. And you get to this junction, which is Route 90. Route 90 moves over here and moves upwards. So this is, we see Jericho to the left every time we enter the coastal plain. If you've been along here, that leads all the way up to Tiberia, that Route 90. Okay, this is called the Jordan Valley where we are right now. This is Jericho over here as a city. Let's take a look at this, just to understand the location of where we are. It's just at the end of the mountains. Now, let's look at it actually from the top. From the top. So take a look at the map I put into on page 3. So here is a picture of what Jericho looks like from the air. So you see Route 90 to the right, and you see Route 1 at the bottom. That's what I was talking about. That's the junction I was mentioning over there. And you'll see the main area where it says Jericho over there. That is where the city of Jericho is, which is an Arab town today. And then on the very top is a place called Ain al-Sultan. You see that? The top of Jericho. I'm zooming in on that rectangle, and if you look at Ain al-Sultan, you'll see it says at the bottom part of it, there's an ancient Jericho Tel Es Sultan. Right, so I put also what it looks like. It's actually lived in. So there are lots of houses around on the top, but the very bottom is this area called Jericho. If you go back on the bottom of page 3, I found a picture from 1903. This is what it looked like in those days. This is it's called Tel. Tel is a mound, right? This is a picture of what it looked like 120 years ago. As you can see, there was no one else living around then, right? So much for the ancient Arab populations that always lived here. But nonetheless, you can see in this picture that this is the mound of Jericho. So the ancient Jericho was built on this mound. The ancient city of Jericho is built on this mound, which is north of the actual city of Jericho as we have it today. But it gets better. Let's zoom in a little further. From the air, if you look at page 4, from the air, this is what that south tip of Tel Es Sultan looks like. Tel Es Sultan is that large outcropping of rock between the two roadways. Do you see it? So that outcropping of rock, on that is built Jericho. That is the ancient Jericho. And if you can see the topological map over here from the Italian-Palestinian expedition to Tel Es Sultan, which was researched out between 1997 and 2015. If you want to sort of see a recreation of what it would look like, you can see it on the top of page 5. And you'll notice that there's 2 stages of walls. So when they've done the archaeological research, they've found there's a lower wall and a higher wall. You can see that the walls are made of stone. There's limestone underneath them, and there's mud to fortify them as well. So we can actually see where the walls of ancient Jericho were. First, a few comments just to notice over here before going further. Number 1 is that there's a number of people that pointed out that the walls of Jericho did fall down, right? So we do have archaeological evidence they fell down. Unfortunately, a number of academics said, yeah, it was an earthquake, right? You can't stop somebody believing in what they want to believe. But nonetheless, there are others who suggest that it did fall down right around now, the 13th to 12th century before Common Era, and it precisely matches exactly what we're talking about. But a few other points. One is I found something really disturbing, which I would like to just acknowledge together, and that is that I was looking at this, I was reading through these different papers. So this one about the Italian-Palestinian expedition was disturbing to me, is that the word Israel does not appear in the entire paper. It only appears in the footnotes because every journal they quote is an Israel Archaeological Journal. But in the actual academic journal itself, the actual writing itself, they do not mention the word Israel at all. It's all Palestine. And in fact, if you go to try to visit Jericho today, you will notice that it's part of the Ministry of Tourism of Palestine, as there's no country called Palestine in the world. But that's where it's at. In a certain sense, and if you look at all the research papers of archaeology from the 80s and the 70s, you'll see it's all Israel. But now it's Palestine. And just to understand that, I'm all fans of other people having control of our archaeological sites, but you can't deny our story. Jericho was not a Muslim site. We'll see in a second, there was a palace that was built there in the Mameluke period, but they were latecomers to the scene. This is the story of Israel. So you can't write us out of the story. So to me, it's very disturbing about this, and it matches many other concerning things. But nonetheless, this is through the period of this research. Now, a few other points over here is that because in archaeology, another piece over here which I think is really important to notice is that the size. If you looked at the maps we just looked at, Jericho wasn't big. None of the cities in those days were big because the populations were so much smaller than what we have today. If you look at Old Jerusalem, which is Ir David, right, at its greatest period, it's not big. Ir David is not big. That's Old Jerusalem, right? Jericho is not big. It's a little mound in midst the sprawling city of Jericho today. So just understand the scale of things. It's not the Jericho of today. It's a much smaller city, but nonetheless it was impenetrable. So just to appreciate this. I do think it's fascinating that because we have these two walls, I think it may help us understand the pasuk, which is Sogeres, Umusogeres. I wonder if when it says in the pasuk it's closed and closed, it means there were two tiers of wall. Jerusalem also had that two tiers of wall at certain points. When we get to Jerusalem, we'll see the different parts of Jerusalem. But I wonder if the closed and closed relates to specifically the archaeological finds, the lower wall and the higher wall, which means it was almost an impossible city to enter because not only was it double walled, but it was also fighting uphill, which means any way to get to Jericho was fighting uphill against two walls. It was impenetrable. Now, why was this the first of their battles? So the most basic idea is that this is the gateway to the heartland. So if you look at this over here the nation of Israel come in, they come across the Dead Sea, and they're now going to try to get to Jerusalem, which is the larger red area here in this large map. So they have to go up the mountains. Whichever way you're going, you have to cut through the mountains. If you look at the topographical map, which I put at the top of page 7, it's on page 6, you'll see that there's an escarpment, right? So you'll see at the top of page 6, there's a mountain range, meaning Jericho is in the valley. It's called the Jordan Valley because of the Jordan River. But if you look towards the center of the picture, you can see the shadow of the mountains, right? You can see the shadow of the mountains as they raise up. You'll notice that the lowest area in those mountains, you see where the mountains go down, is towards the bottom of the page, where it says Route 1, right? Meaning they built the Route 1 to Jerusalem in the lowest access point of the mountains, which makes sense. Meaning, if you want to get into the heartland, you're going to have to go where the mountains are the lowest, which is where Jericho is built, which makes sense because in a certain sense, Jericho therefore is the gateway to Israel. So conquering Jericho is necessary to get into Israel. It makes sense why it was placed there in the first place. And we'll see strategically in later history when we get there in a few moments what happened later on as to the significance of this. But it makes sense it's the gateway. I would tell you even more than that. And that is that I think it's even more profound. It looks like the psukim misprinted because of the font. But it's interesting that the first thing that the spies, the Tayarim or the Meraglim, come back and Shlach say, is they say it's a wonderful place, it's flowing with milk and honey, big fruit in the whole business, but he says, Ki aza'am, the people are strong, and it says, Arim b'tzuros, they have these large fortified cities. And that is seen as one of their scare tactics to the nation of Israel. The Meraglim say we're not going to make it because they've got these large fortified cities. There's no way we're going to make it as a ragtag bunch of Bedouins are going to be able to conquer these fortified cities, certainly the coastal cities as well. It's interesting later on in Sefer Devarim, where Hashem tells the nation of Israel, says, Shema Yisrael, you're going to go into the land where there's a land which is Arim B'Tzuros. You have these large fortified cities, meaning the Torah acknowledges, I know you're going in, I know the walls are going to be big, and you're still going to win. Right, so meaning the walled city seems to be very important in terms of not just the fact that this is the gateway into Israel, but this is also a symbol of conquering your fears. Right, this is the exposure therapy. You thought you can't do it. The first conquest you can do is against the doubly fortified city of the gateway. So it makes a lot of sense that what we're seeing is about to happen. Let's talk a little bit of just a few questions as we go through this perek and so on. I just do want to point out that if you look at the page 6. In the middle picture, there is the Google Street View picture of the turnoff into Jericho, right? So if you're going up Route 90, so you come down Route 1, you go down, your ears pop because you're going down into the valley, right? You get down below sea level, right? It's the lowest place on earth, and you take a left. Right, it makes sense the lowest place on earth because when God turned over Sodom and Amorah, He did a really good job, right? In Parshas, right? It makes sense in Parshas Vayera. That's where it happens, right? So it's crushed into the ground. So it makes sense. That's exactly what we see. So nonetheless, you come in, you take a left on, you go past all the date palm orchards, right? And you take a left on Route 90. A few minutes later, to your left is the entrance to Jericho. This is what the entrance looks like, and you can see all the mountains to your right, which is why it's the gateway to. Right, to your left is where you go up Route 1, because that's the gateway into Israel. You'll notice in the middle is a little red sign. It's not just a little red sign, but if you turn into that, this is the sign that you find at the entrance of any Arab city in Israel, fully a Palestinian Arab city in Israel, which is, if you are Israeli, don't go here because you will be killed. It's an amazing thing. And this speaks again to the idea of we want a two-state solution, and we know what the two-state solution will look like, is that if you are a Jewish person and you go into an Arab territory, you'll be disemboweled publicly and dragged behind a motorcycle in the middle of the city as they take out your innards and display them from the tractor that they're dragging you on. That's the type of coexistence. Meaning, if you're a Christian or if you're a Muslim, you can go into Jericho today. The reason why we don't know so much about Jericho as much as regular people is because we'll be killed if we go in there, because it's Arab, and the religion of peace does not appreciate Jews. So nonetheless, it is important to understand this is the context, and it matches, unfortunately, the academic journal that I was mentioning before, and is we're being written out of this history. Meaning, if it's an Israeli city, Muslims and Christians and Jews and Baha'i are all welcome, and it's coexistence, and we don't destroy the minaret even in the Jewish quarter. But the other way around, it's not a two-way street. Nonetheless, it's a disappointing landscape, unfortunately. But let's go a little further into our studies today. So we hear this whole message from Hashem at the beginning of the perek. How is Hashem speaking to Yehoshua exactly? It sounds like a lucid discussion. We know that generally speaking, outside of Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem does not have lucid discussions with people, right? They have to have it in dreams. So how's He speaking to him? The Radak says he was just speaking to a malach, right? Remember, there was this apparition at night. The apparition is speaking to him. Well, the conversation continues, and now he's saying, "This is what you're going to do." So that's how the malach explains it. So here we go. The next question is as follows. This is a very strange method of conquest, as of all wars go. If you were to be asked, how would you suggest conquering Jericho? I don't think we would have come up with this. I don't think we would have come up with the ark, the shofar, the 7 priests, the circling, the 6 stays, the 7th day. I don't think that's. So why is that? Says the Radak, who are you to ask that question? You're not God. Says the Radak, look at this. Only short time in source 4. Only short time in the Sibor Sabore. This is not. It's not your jurisdiction to ask these questions as to what's going on over here. That's just not a human department, right? However, the Radak does give some reasons after that. But his point is that we can't fully understand what's going on. Okay, let's go a little further. So you say, let's look at a few things. The impact, the march. So why are they going around 7 times? So the Radak himself says is because it's going to scare the people inside. Imagine you're waiting for war, and your enemy comes outside, walks around in silence, and they blow the horn, and then they go away. And the next day they come and walk around, they blow the horn, and they go away. I don't know, I'm not sleeping so well at night. Right? So it's scaring the people inside, but more than that, is that if this is going to be the way that the nations of Canaan are vanquished, they're going to be very scared. The other nations, you hear about this. This is like the continue of this, this light and show of what it means, it's going to have a very big impact, this method as well. However, there's a few other things. So for instance, the spiritual number, like the Ralbag points out, that 7 seems to be a very Jewish number, right? God seems to really like 7s. There's 7 days of Pesach, 7 days of Sukkot, 7 days of Shemitah, 7 days of the week, right? So 7 seems to appear, this is very much a spiritual number. I will add to that. And that is that the 7 sevens is obviously very important to us, because we see it in the Shemitah cycle and we see it in the Omer cycle as well. So there's 7 sets of days 7 times, and there's 7 sets of years 7 times, and we see those actually back to back in Parshas Emor and Parshas Bahar. What is interesting to me is that if you remember last week when we looked at the eating from the land, and we saw that in fact the Omer sacrifice might be a historical reminder of the Omer in the desert, the transition between eating the bread of heaven to the bread of the earth, right? Then in a certain sense, these 2 cycles are very much agricultural cycles, recognizing our lack of control of the land. Is that interesting? Meaning if the Omer is counting from the Omer sacrifice, where in a certain sense we recognize that everything that we're planting now is a function of God, like it was when it was falling from heaven. That's what we're trying to remember in the Sfiras HaOmer. Right? If that's what it is, as we discussed last week in perek. And if the Shemitah cycle is cease and desist, don't get involved in the land, leave it fallow, you're not in charge, and then the larger one at the 49th, 50th year, when you completely give back in the return of land, it makes so much sense that the first conquest of the land of Israel would be an echo of that. Meaning it makes sense that here you're about to enter into the land of Israel. Remember, this is not your land. You think there's the right of conquest? Well, just a reminder that Hashem says, I've got a little more to the agenda as well over here. Let's take a little further. What about the shofar? So there's another part of the 7 over here, is that Chazal actually suggest that the 7th day is Sabbath, which means that this 7-day cycle of circle, and then 7 circles actually matches the days of the week. It started on Sunday, ended on Shabbos, which is interesting, because then the Radak points out that means to say the battle took place on Shabbos. And generally speaking, we don't try to have war on Shabbos if we're able to. This is a Milchemes Mitzvah, as it happens to be. But that means to say is that there is also the element of the Shabbos embedded in this as well. Meaning this is the week actually embedded over here. The culmination of that cycle is on Shabbos itself. There's more than this. Why the shofar? So the Ralbag says shofar is to wake us up. Like anytime, unfortunately, you speak to anybody who lives in Israel right now, and they hear a siren, right? They hear a fire truck, right? They still have PTSD from being there. Anybody who's been there and had to experience sirens, right? And were there for the Iran war, was there for the beginning of October 7th war. When you hear sirens, you react differently. That's what the shofar is. When you hear the shofar, there's something naturally inside you which is scared, and this is what's being conducted over here. Why the ark? Why is the ark over here? So the reason is, the Ralbag says, is to remind Israel, this is in source 9, I'm not reading aside, just for your reference, is to remind Israel, if you want to win these wars, it needs to be centered around the Torah which is in this ark. Understand that if you abandon the ark, if you abandon what's inside here, good luck, see what happens then. But it's not going to be without this as well. So a lot of fascinating symbolism in all of this as well. What is interesting is that in this procession, it's fascinating how it's organized, because the Malbim points out that it's different to the way it was organized in the desert. In the desert, the way it worked was, what was first? Always? The Aaron was always first, right? Aaron Bayam and Moshe, it was 3 days ahead of them to clear the way. In fact, even when they were on the Trans-Jordan, we just saw it in Perek Gimel, what went first was the ark. But now as you enter the land of Israel, the ark isn't first, the ark is second. Is that interesting? So in a certain sense, says the Malbim, there's a transition between, we'll call it God's actions and human actions. It used to be that the ark, God's actions was always first. You had clouds, you had manna, you had water, you had protection, and the ark was always first. Now, not so fast. Now comes the people first, then the ark, and then the rest of the people, which means, in a certain sense, God's actions are taking a second seat here. Which leads me to a basic question, is who conquered Jericho? It's a good question, right? Who conquered the city of Jericho? The answer is the nation of Israel. God did not kill the people of Jericho. God brought down the walls, allowing the battle to take place. The people of Jericho were unprepared for that battle because they thought they could rely on their walls. But God did not destroy the people of Jericho. God destroyed the walls of Jericho to allow the war to ensue afterwards, which is a really important point, which is exactly in terms of the positioning of the Aaron. In a sense, the Hashem is saying, I'm taking the second seat, I'm going to allow you to fight this battle, I'm going to allow you to do the necessary battle tactics, but I'm going to help you out. I'm going to remove a barrier to that as well. This, in a certain sense, is a recession of God, right? And we're going to see continual recessions of Hashem's actions, allowing the human actions in as well, which is part of this entire cycle, which makes so much sense because Hashem is trying to move them out of the modality of complete God reliance into being able to see Hashem in the agriculture, in the land itself as well. Now, let's get a few other questions which I think are really critical to understanding over here. And that is that Yehoshua seems to add in a few details, right? He puts in a cherem, destroy everybody, sanctify this. Like, where did he get that from? So the Radak says he must have got it from Hashem. Meaning, if he's doing something, he must have got it from Hashem. And we saw this before. The Radak wants to suggest that anytime you see the Torah doesn't have to explicate, the Tanakh doesn't explicate every time he breathed in, that Hashem commanded him to breathe. We know that, However, I believe that the Radak there's room to argue on this Radak, and we'll see even from Chazal next week, because we're going to see that in the future they're going to lose their second battle. The first battle they win, the second battle they lose, and one of the attributions to that loss is Yeshua's cherem, which means that there's going to be blame laid at the feet of Yehoshua, not God. So I wonder why it is, and I'm going to leave this as a hanging question, why Yehoshua is introducing new ideas. Why is Yehoshua doing things that Hashem did not ask him to do in this battle? There's a little bit of human creativity over here, which in a certain sense matches the military creativity. Hashem's saying, I'm taking a step back, I'm giving human control. When you give human control, when you deputize, guess what? They make decisions, right? So like say that you're the owner of the business and you have a new manager, you have a new CEO, and they start making decisions, right? And you want them to, on the one hand, to own it and to drink the Kool-Aid and to care about it like you care about it because you're the business owner. But on the other hand, it's like, how do you rein them in, right? And that's a little bit of this over here. This is in a certain sense with the same question about the Torah Sheba'al Peh and the Torah Shebechsav. God says, here's what to do, but now he's giving it to a human. This human being is also doing things, right? How much leverage, how much space do you want to give this person? That's a part of the question we're going to have to explore in the next two perek, where we see the consequences of Yehoshua's cherem, which were not necessarily so good as well. Now, why in his mind did he make the cherem? Why would Yehoshua make this cherem? There are a lot of good reasons. So, for instance, the Radak points out, because it's like Truma. What is Truma? He reads the Torah. Imagine what Yehoshua's bookshelf looks like. In Yeshua's bookcase, he's got one book, bestseller of all time, called the Bible, right? The Torah is there, the 5 books, the Pentateuch. That's what he's reading. He's not reading it. He's not reading Tanakh. He's living Tanakh, right? There's nothing else. So what does he read? He reads in the Torah that when you make successful operations, you grow plants, you have animals and firstborns and things like, what do? You give the first one to God. So this is the first city, so you give it to God. Makes sense. Meaning, here I am, I'm designated all to God. No financial incentive. We're not going to go and take their couches and their grand pianos and take it to our camp. Nope, everything's getting burnt. This is the Truma. That's what the Radak says as well. The Radak goes on to say, if it's true that this is like Chazal say that the 7th day was Sabbath, the Shabbos, that means to say that war was had on Shabbos. In a certain sense, this is like an echo of what's called Maaseh Shabbos, which means you're not going to benefit from what you the malacha you did on Shabbos. You conquered this on Shabbos. Leave it. This is not to be taken as well. Going a little further, the Malbim suggests that, you know what? It's also supposed to be a memorial. It's very important to be able to tell history. And so we came into the land of Israel, we conquered them, destroyed them. It was a miracle, the walls fell down. How are children going to know? The answer is, they're going to walk past a smoldering heap of stones every time they take a left on Route 90, and they're going to say, Dad, what happened there? Mom, what was this? And you're going to say, oh, the first battle. Meaning it's meant to be a memorial. It's meant to be a museum for the future, which makes sense, like the stones of the Jordan, right? We have to tell the story. That's what's being described over here. And potentially as well, the Ralbag adds in a little bit of a wrinkle, which is he doesn't want it to be that, let's say you enter into Jericho, and then you take somebody's bicycle, right, after the battle, right, and now you sell the bicycle and you attribute your success to this bicycle, it's your lucky bicycle, right? He says, no, there's no lucky bicycles. There's no grand pianos you're getting over here. Burn it all. This is all God, right? I mean, don't think that any of this, which is why you're not supposed to rebuild it. I mean, don't think this is your lucky city, your lucky possessions. Make sure to avoid this. So all these reasons must be going through Yeshua's mind. However, I think it is important to realize that Yeshua also is reading the Torah. And the Torah does tell us that, take a look at this, at what Yeshua must have read, right? So this is in source 15, the bottom, page 8. Where the Torah tells us, you're going to call out to it in peace, and if it answers peace, then you give them peace. If not, then you destroy it. However, the Psukim carry on the top of page 9 to say, This is like, let's say you're conquering Damascus, not in Israel, right? In the cities of the land of Canaan, don't let anybody live. Destroy them. Now we're going to have to figure out what this means, because there is a debate between Rashi and the Ramban as to, do you offer peace to everybody? What happens if they decline peace? But there was no peace offered to Jericho. But in Yehoshua's book, without getting into the depth of this debate of when peace is offered and when it's not, Yehoshua is reading this. It sounds like, if you just read a cursory read of this psukim, you come into the land of Israel, destroy them. The word is the same word. Destroy them. Right? The word cherem also means to be makdish, to give something to the Beis Hamikdash, and he's doing both. He's saying destroy all property except gold and silver, which goes to the coffers of Hashem. So if he's following his psukim, in a certain sense he's intuiting this, and in fact it happened before. In Parashas Chukas, if you remember, in the middle of the parasha, after Aaron dies, the clouds recede. After the clouds recede, a Canaanite nation attacks Israel and takes the captive. They take a hostage. Unfortunately, something which echoes throughout history. Israel again goes to war against them because Israel doesn't leave hostages behind. Right? And they make a neder, and they say, if Hashem, you'll give us this nation, we will make them a cherem. And that's what happens. They destroy this nation, and they wipe out this entire area, and they call the area Chorma, based on the cherem. Which means, this is in Parashas Chukas, this is not so long. Chorma is around here in the south, just to the east of Beersheba. That was before Israel had to go around the side. So they destroyed a place called Chorma, and they made it a cherem. So now when Yeshua is entering the land of Israel, it makes sense that the first conquest, he looks at the Pesukim, it says destroy all of them. He reads about what they did at Chorma. He remembers, he doesn't read. He remembers what they did at Chorma. So in a certain sense, he's saying, okay, we're going to replicate the same procedure as well for all the reasons mentioned above. But you say to yourself, well, that's all very nice from Yeshua's perspective. Do all the people need to really die? Like theologically, from Hashem's perspective, in his book, did everybody need to die? The Ralbag says, yes, actually, because it must be that these people were, in fact, more pagan, more complicated morally, and that's why perhaps they deserve to die, or maybe they didn't deserve to die, but an example needed to be made. And that's the way war works, unfortunately, is that there is a cost of war, and this might be the cost of war, is making an example of this city so that people would learn from it. Did Yeshua's curse actually come into being? Meaning to say, Yeshua made this curse. Nobody should ever rebuild Jericho, right? Did this come into being? The answer is absolutely, actually. We have it black on white. If you read Sefer Melachim, which Be'ezra Hashem, if we continue doing this together, we're going to get there not so far. Okay, so when you get to Melachim, Aleph, perek, Tez Zayin, the end of Tez Zayin, a new king comes to town. His name is Achav. Achav is not such a great king. He marries a non-Jewish woman. Her name is Jezebel. Jezebel is a Phoenician. She is not Jewish. And she brings in all the idol worship into the land of Israel. This is the northern kingdom. And because whenever you have bad things that go on in terms of administration, then it filters down within no time whatsoever to the populace itself, right? I mean, you say, when you defund the police, you're going to have problems, right? I'm not that we're endorsing or contesting any candidates for elections, but it's just a natural outcome of these kinds of policies. So Achav comes to town. Idol worship is the party of the day. So we hear about. You take a look at the top of page 10. Vayaz Achav es Asherah, Vayosef Achav la'asos alachis es Hashem elokei Yisrael mikol malchei Yisrael asher hayu lefanov, and he introduces the Asherah, the Eshtar, which is one of the pagan services. And the next thing is, but Yomov, in his day, meaning this is what happens as a result of this kind of bad leadership, Bono Chiel, there's a fellow called Chiel, es Ha'eli, es Yericho. He decided to build Jericho. He rebuilt Jericho in the times of Achav. Ba'aviram b'choro yosta, u'v'saguv tziro hitziv delaseh. And his firstborn Aviram died when he started, and his younger son, including all the children in between, died when he finally put the doors in. And the Tanakh emphasizes, Kidvar Hashem asher diber biyad Yehoshua ben Nun, like the curse. Meaning, that's what happened. It's amazing. Human beings are so fickle, right? Like, whatever your reason, whatever it is, they rezoned, right? You can make big apartment buildings. Like, whatever it is, right? It's your children. But apparently, there wasn't enough. So nonetheless, this is what happens. I do want to fast forward as we close today, just to sort of look into the future as to how this went. Jericho has had a very long and fascinating history. In fact, if you read, it is argued to be the oldest settled city in the world. Meaning, to today, it's the oldest city which is still settled today, which people are living in, that we actually have records or archaeologically. Now, again, we're kind of like playing in the background because we're trying to find the archaeological, ruins. The world's a big place, but nonetheless, that's the claim. And it's interesting that afterwards, actually, we had many different stages of this. So, for instance, in the Second Temple, it was a very popular place. It was controlled by the Hasmoneans. They had their winter palaces in this area. Once the Hasmoneans were killed by Herodas, Herod took it over and he built a fort. So if you look at the map, I put these pictures here. You can see the Hasmonean royal winter palaces. All their ruins are there. That's if you look at the map on the bottom of page 10, there's the heart towards the bottom of the page is where the Hasmonean castle is. Then there's the Kypros castle, which was made by Herod, which was a fortification on the hill overlooking the valley. Later on, when Christianity was invented, they created a monastery in the mountains called the St. George Monastery. And the Mountain of Temptation is built into the side of the mountains. The famous pictures of Jericho today, you see the blue-capped towers. That is the St. George Monastery on the mountain. And then later on, when Islam was invented, in the Mameluke period, they also took, generally Islam builds on the ruins of other nations, and so that's why Jericho is settled by the Arabs, generally speaking, and they have a beautiful palace there called Hisham's Palace. It's beautiful, beautiful mosaics on the floor, which they've uncovered recently. That is in the top right, where next to Ain al-Sultan is in the map. So very, very lucrative past as well. It's worthwhile noting just a few pieces of the history of this. So after Hiel rebuilt it and people started settling in it, we see that it has a very long, illustrious history. So, for instance, I was reading in Biblical Archaeological Library by Suzanne Singh in the 1977. She points out that the reason why it was so popular during the Second Temple was because the Hasmoneans introduced a new technology called the aqueduct. Right? The aqueduct was they were able to take water from great distances, and they built. It's amazing how they did this. I mean, we're not talking about water pumps. We're talking about gravity. So they were able to build aqueducts which brought water down to this area. They did this across Jerusalem. It's pretty amazing. You can see this is a picture. I put a picture over here of the aqueducts towards Jericho. These are like arched, it looks like roadways, but it's not roads. They're bringing water. And because of that, as you know, the Jordan Valley happens to be very rich and fertile, which makes sense. By the way, Srefa Kol Arza, when Hashem destroyed Sodom and Amorah, it's a very rich territory. It's the fertile area of the valley, but there's not enough water because it's the very end of the Jordan. But once you can bring in the water of the aqueduct, it became very rich and fertile farmland. So what did they grow there? They grew two really important crops, and they are balsam and persimmon. Why do you think that's important? I was asking the tour guide when we were there recently. This is an amazing thing to realize. Herod built such magnificent monuments. He rebuilt the second Beis Hamikdash, meaning the western wall is Herodian stone, the framed stones. He rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash. That's just the framing wall. That wasn't even the Beis Hamikdash that we're praying in front of, right? That's just the outer edge of the box, right? But he built many more things. If you go up to Masada and you see the palaces there, I mean, I can't imagine how they got those rocks up, those bricks up that mountain. I mean, they must have had a lot of slaves doing a lot of hard work. But let me tell you, and it's hot, right? So, but they had this massive castle there. They had massive castles in Jericho. He had castles in Damascus. I mean, Herod. So I was like, where did the money come from? I asked my tour guide. Like, you can't do that kind of building, that kind of slave labor, that kind of quarrying without a cartload of cash. Like, where was his money coming from? The answer is persimmon and balsam, because at this point in time in the Roman Empire, this was both medicinal and it was also perfume. The greatest producing city of persimmon and balsam was Jericho in the Jordan Valley, because it was fertilized by the aqueduct system of the Hasmoneans, and that was why Judea was the epicenter of trade during the Herodian times, which is why all these palaces could be made. By the way, same thing, Maras Machpelah. Right, it's the same stone. He built that too. Meaning, there was so much money. He only ruled for 31 years in the Herodian time. But he built all these things. There was money. This was the epicenter. This was the oil of the second Beis Hamikdash era, and it was in Jericho where they were able to bring the water in. But it's fascinating to note the intrigue of this. By the way, Kypros castle. That's the name of his mother. Right, Antipras was his father. He named himself after his family a lot of places, but. It's fascinating. If you go back to 1838, I was reading through the annals of Edward Robinson, who was one of these, if I could go back and be a particular period of time, I'd love to have been an explorer in the 1800s in Palestine, the Ottoman Palestine at the time, because it would have just been amazing. There's so much to discover. So there's a whole bunch of people like this who go in, and Edward Robinson's one of these people, and here's his description on page 552, where he describes what Jericho looked like in the 1800s. He says, "We are now returned to the village, which bears the Arabic name Eriha, which is, of course, just a takeoff of Jericho, right? Is more commonly pronounced Riha, a degenerate shoot, both in name and character of the ancient Jericho. Situated in the midst of a vast plain, it reminded me of an Egyptian village. The plain is rich and susceptible of easy tillage and abundant irrigation." So that reflects exactly the history of the Hasmoneans, with a climate to produce anything. And if you go now today, they have large groves of date palms, even bananas if you go further up north. It says, yet it lies almost desert. And the village is most miserable, the most miserable and filthy we saw in Palestine. The houses or hovels are merely 4 walls of stones taken from the ancient ruins. Because again, the Arabs don't build new. They just take the old ruins. If you look at the buildings of the southern excavations, they took the blocks of the base of the English outer wall, and they made their own palaces from those blocks. It was like they didn't quarry their own stone. He says, and loosely thrown together with flat roofs or corn stalks or brushwood spread over the gravel. They stand quite irregularly, as they are today, with large intervals, and each has around it a yard enclosed by a hedge of the dry, thorny boughs of nubk. In many of these yards are open sheds with similar roofs. The flocks and herds are brought into them at night and render them filthy in the extreme. A similar but stronger hedge of nubk branches surrounds the whole village, forming an impenetrable barrier. The few gardens around that seem to contain nothing but tobacco and cucumbers. One single solitary palm now timidly rears its head where once stood the renowned city of palm trees, Ir Hatmarim. So it's amazing just to contrast these descriptions of the Jericho area. The Hasmoneans, the center of trade in the Roman Empire, the richest epicenter of trade was Jericho. And in the 1800s, and the worst and most filthy of all the cities in the land of Israel. And unfortunately, it has not been under Israeli control, and it has not flourished as a function of that. But there's an echo, a little bit of that curse of Yehoshua, which did come to fruition, but also the promise of the rebirth, Be'ezrat Hashem, when it does return to Israeli control, to Jewish control, that will actually look after it and allow everybody in to appreciate the history of it. Thank you so much, Rudy, for coming today.